And I'd like our panelists to come and join us on the stage, if you would. Sean Horrigan is a neurologist with our Neurologists of Cape Cod. And Neurologists of Cape Cod, as we've seen the growth of Alzheimer's disease, have put together a Dementia Alzheimer's program, which I think is going to help us tremendously in dealing with this, and which we've integrated our quality of life care planning program into. Karen Weston Hanesian is a private practice attorney here in Hyannis for almost 20 years. She concentrates on elder law and estate planning, and has been a wonderful resource for us at the hospital over the years, and somebody who's well known to us at the facility is a tremendous help. Paul Goddu has had a career in the financial services industry and currently is serving as the Chief Financial Officer for the AIDS Support Group of Cape Cod. And Reverend Mary Hansen-Joyce is our own Reverend Mary from Cape Cod Healthcare. She's assigned to us by the Council of Churches and provides a lot of counsel and insight within our facility that we're always grateful for. And what we have, where did I lose that? Oh, there we go. What we have now is a case study that unfortunately is something that we see in our intensive care unit, if not on a daily basis, at least on a weekly basis. And our case study is of Marie. Marie is 83 years old and lives locally in her home with her sister. She lost her husband to cancer in 2017. Her daughter lives outside of Boston and tries to visit once a month. She also has a son who's married and has 3 children, and they live in California. She's extremely religious. Until 2 years ago, she volunteered in the local food pantry. She's now been diagnosed with Alzheimer's as of 2015. She also has a history of diabetes and heart disease, and her sister's been helping her with appointments and supervision in the home since the loss of her husband. She was brought to the emergency room after her sister found her on the floor in her home. She was septic and in complete renal failure. This was Marie's 3rd hospitalization in the last year, and she's now in the ICU. Her prognosis is poor, and she's no longer able to communicate. So what we see when this happens is, then the troops come in. Marie's son arrives and insists that she have a feeding tube placed, and that she be provided with all means of resuscitation. Her daughter arrives and reports to the team that her mother told her she didn't want to be resuscitated if she would never have meaningful communication, and she would want comfort measures only under that circumstance. Her son tells us that he is the agent and will be making the decision. We have no evidence of a healthcare proxy form anywhere, or any kind of planning documentation in the patient's record. As I said, unfortunately, this is far more typical than the 2 stories you heard earlier today. What we are able to ascertain after doing a little more research is Marie has done some planning. Back in 1990, she and her husband completed a will, a living will, and a healthcare proxy. She named her husband as her agent. Remember on the prior page, her husband is no longer with us. In 2018, she was admitted into a skilled nursing facility, and that nursing facility asked her to fill out a healthcare proxy form, and on that form, she named her sister as her agent. So, unfortunately, what we have is a relatively typical mess that unfortunately is what got me started down this pathway and what brought all of you here today. And we have a panel of experts here who can tell us how what they've built or what they do might be able to impact this case, or what they could have done that might have been able to impact this case going forward. Why don't we start with Dr. Horrigan, because I know you're doing a lot of stuff in the office there, and also you're at one end, so I arbitrarily picked an end.
Thanks, Don. So I am a community neurologist. I work here in town, but I'm also a consultant for the hospital. So Unfortunately, I get consulted in the intensive care unit often for cases where someone is critically ill and they are unable to advocate for themselves about the critical state of their health, about what to do next. And an already challenging and heartbreaking situation is elevated to even a greater upsetting state when you have family members rolling into the unit, wanting to talk to the patient's care team, and not knowing what a plan would be given these circumstances. And obviously it would be ideal if we had a healthcare proxy clearly listed, demarcated, family was in agreement, and that the patient's wishes were known. But often myself, my colleagues were struggling with less than ideal information, and we're trying to advocate for our patient and to try to help that patient's family make the best decision. So what usually helps in this type of circumstance is focusing on the facts. And I find spending a lot of time sitting down with the family, talking over the state of the exam, going over recent test results, going over a picture of a brain if it's been injured. A picture can be 1,000 words, and to kind of show and sell and have a clear understanding about the degree of the injury involved, I think paints an appropriate, a realistic picture. That way, if some members weren't entirely clear as to what was going on, there's no question anymore as to what the issue is at this time and what we need to do next. I think for a lot of family members, there's a lot of guilt, there's a lot of sadness. Nobody wants to be that person making that decision. And I think for a physician to kind of step in and to advocate and to explain what the exact situation is and what the prognosis is, that will help a family that's kind of in disharmony kind of get into alignment as to what we need to do next and to figure out if backing off on aggressive medical care is the right approach.
Why don't you tell the group a little bit about what you're building within your office around dementia care?
Yeah, so we have organized a memory care center for Cape Cod, and this started about a year ago. And it came out of the need to address a crisis. We have a booming Alzheimer's population here on the Cape. Alzheimer rates are going up across the country. Cape Cod being a retirement community, we have higher numbers because we have an older population. And in my opinion, Alzheimer's patients and their families are probably the highest at-risk group here on the Cape. Alzheimer's disease is a terminal illness. It's not something we tend to think about all too often, but the humbling truth is that at some point with the progression of the disease, a person really can't advocate for themselves anymore, and they need greater help from family and other services. So it's a perfect understanding that if you're a dementia patient or if you're caring for a loved one with dementia, you need to have these conversations about end-of-life care and end-of-life goals. So we've been working very closely with Dawn and Tina regarding this matter for a while now. But the Memory Care Center basically came in out of a need to get the word out to the community and to do a better job advocating for patients and families with Alzheimer's. So the mission statement is really to help diagnose patients sooner, to help primary care doctors with the diagnosis and the treatment plan. And I think probably even more important, it's making sure that these patients and their families have access to the appropriate resources. I've been a neurologist here on the Cape for about 9 going on 10 years, and I learned pretty quickly that there are all these wonderful groups, wonderful organizations that want to do so much to help these families in need. And for a time, we seemed to be our own little professors doing our own little jobs really well under our own little roofs, but we weren't communicating with one another. And with the Memory Care Center, what we have been doing is working much more closely with the Alzheimer's Family Support Network of Cape Cod. Hope Health has now been incorporated into Cape Cod Healthcare. So we have a close working relationship with Suzanne Faith and Alan Johnson, who advocate for families. Because truth be told, the diagnosis and the treatment plan is such a small part of the story. Living with Alzheimer's disease, it's a changing, evolving animal, and that just generates more questions and concerns and worries that need to be addressed with the right caregiver support groups and educational seminars, and these organizations that we work with closely have been helping to fill that need. I'm also proud to say that we've been working very closely with Brigham and Women's Hospital. The only way we're going to get a cure for this disease is with research and clinical trials. And with our working relationship with Dr. Rentz and her colleagues, we're actually doing a lot more research opportunities and drug trials for our families that are willing to go up to Boston. So it takes a village. It's a changing atmosphere. I remember early on that I wanted to be a doctor, probably when I was a teenager. I just always knew this is what I wanted to do. And I think what probably triggered that interest was watching all those doctor shows and doctor movies. And I learned pretty quickly watching all those things that, oddly enough, inspired me to be where I am today was a lot of those stories always ended with a victory, that there was a cure, or there was that eureka moment where the doctor got the answer and the patient left the hospital and that was the end. That they were sick, they toughed it out, and they got better. And life moved on. And the real world is, for most physicians, myself included, we take care of people living with disease that doesn't go away. That it's learning how to live with that disease that matters most, and to be strong, and who to know to back up and lean on to when it keeps changing and evolving over time. There's a lot of chronic illness that we don't celebrate on television, we don't show in the movies. And my hope is with the Memory Care Center, we can kind of change that narrative. And I know there's a lot more to be done with research and getting a cure for Alzheimer's. We have a lot of work to do, and I'm still very hopeful. I think about what happened with the diagnosis and treatment for AIDS. I think about the narrative that's changed with cancer, with research and new novel medications to help people, and I think we can still do that with neurodegenerative disease.
Thank you. Karen?
Okay. Hi. So, can you hear me? I'm regretting wearing a skirt right now. And the second thing I want to tell you is I never liked those TV shows about attorneys. But I really do like what I do. I practice elder law with attorney Aaron Barnes and with 4 great paralegals and a bookkeeper. And our practice is really estate planning oriented with a heavy dose of guardianship work that we do for Cape Cod Healthcare. Also, so we're trying to help people on both ends, who are in crisis and maybe try to prevent the crisis if we can. And I'd like to say we're in the trenches with all of you because really we're all taking care of the same people. And I also like to say that we're in the business of settling people down every day. And even this fact pattern here, what it calls for is somebody to settle these people down who are in conflict. If we can do that, we can avoid going to court and having to argue about it. So that's really a huge part of my practice and preparation with people is trying to anticipate what might happen in certain families. Talking about choice of agent, is really, really important. It struck me, the comment about, having this, the diagnosis of Alzheimer's and not having any money. Well, those are the kinds of conversations, that's not the right solution for everyone. Sometimes you want to pay for care and the best possible care you can get and the best possible food you can get in the best possible place. So those kinds of conversations we're having, choice of agent under power of attorney is very important. We don't want the child who's trying to protect all of the money for themselves. There's a real conflict there. And then choice of agent for a healthcare proxy. That's important too because those two people have to work together and get along. So that's always a concern of ours. This just fact pattern talks about a healthcare proxy too, actually, that were signed, and yet we can't find them. So every time I meet with someone who tells me that they've signed a healthcare proxy, I make them prove it. And I think we all should. Let's make sure that we get a copy, get it in the medical record, and if it's not done, if they can't prove it, let's have them sign one. So we've been doing healthcare proxies at no charge in our office for 26 years, and we continue to do it because cost shouldn't be a factor. They're free and available everywhere, and if we've got people and we can help talk you through the process and get one signed, we're going to do it. In this fact pattern, so part of the work that I do for the hospital is if there is not a healthcare proxy or if there's a conflict, we will go to court and pursue a guardianship. And in this fact pattern, hopefully we wouldn't have to. Do you want me to talk about the fact pattern for a minute? Okay, so hopefully we would not have to, because there are, after all, two healthcare proxies. And a healthcare proxy signed appointing the sister, if that's located, it appears that the sister is helpful, that she's the person who found the patient and made sure she got the medical care. She seems appropriate. She would have, if we can find the document, every right to make the decision. If we can't find the document, or if we have the son produces a more current healthcare proxy, well, then that one supersedes the one appointing the sister. So we may, if the decisions that son are making are inappropriate from the point of view of the hospital and the sibling, sister and daughter, have to proceed with a guardianship anyway in the probate court, which is really unfortunate. This fact pattern mentions a living will. So living wills are not legally enforceable in Massachusetts, but they are very helpful and used as evidence of a person's wishes. So, I always ask when people tell me they have a living will, did a lawyer write it, or do you know what it says? Is this how you feel about, your care and at end of life? And, I do think they're useful for that purpose, and in this case would be very helpful if we had to go to court. The other issue is just that she's a Catholic, and we have had a few cases recently where the patient practices Catholicism, and we've been able to get, I think, pretty good information from the Catholic Church about this. And, really the position is that if a person is suffering, that they're not required to suffer. And, at the end of life, it is appropriate to withhold treatment if it's futile. So I feel like that issue we have had come up several times in court proceedings, but there's an answer for that, and I think we have it. So I'm not sure. I think that addresses most of the questions. And what I'm doing in my practice to try to prevent it, every day we are wishing that people will come through the door and not be in crisis. Many of them are already in crisis, but if they come in and the crisis hasn't happened yet, then we're going to prepare for it. We're going to get documents in place. We're going to counsel them about who should be making decisions if they can't and what they would want. So that's my piece.
Thank you. Since Karen brought this up, and people may be curious, okay, so what do we do in a situation like this? It truly is a mess. One of the things we do, first of all, is I tend to call our corporate attorney to say, what are our options here? And one of the options is pressing for guardianship. We try very hard not to go down that route. So the first step really is going to be a meeting with the family to get everybody together in one room and say, look, things are not going well here, and it's not going to go well for you if we get to an inevitable conclusion and mom dies and all there is conflict in your family. That's not going to lead to, and usually if it's me, I'm pretty direct with them, that's not going to lead to good closure, nor is it going to lead to peace and harmony within your family, and it's probably not what your mom would want. So let's try and figure out what it is that we can do to get to some consensus here and get to where everybody's comfortable that we're going with mom's wishes and that we are not just going down a whole bunch of different roads. Now, sometimes you can do that, sometimes you can't do that. It's amazing how dysfunctional some families are. I always told my kids as they were growing up, you need to understand that the definition of a normal family is a family that you don't know the inside of. We all have our strengths and our weaknesses and our fights and our challenges, but most of us can kind of rally and bring it together in a situation like this. However, there are times that we do end up actually needing to go to court to sue for guardianship because you have a situation where most of the family and all of the caregivers say, this is almost cruel. We really don't think that this is appropriate. And so then it's kind of a gamble to see what a judge will say. Paul?
Hi. So when I first read this, the first thought that I had is this family could be diagnosed with a severe case of the shoulda, coulda, wouldas, right? Here's this kid in California who flies in and is going to fix everything, mostly out of guilt. Here's a daughter who has tried her level best, but still feeling guilty about it. Mothers and daughters, right? The second thing that occurred to me was, and this will come as no surprise to any of the women in this room, men are lousy in this situation. We really are lousy. My mom got sick, I lost it. I was utterly useless to the family. Now, I'm the eldest, so there were certain expectations. I blew them all away. I couldn't deal with that at all. Not at all. So then you get back to doctors, well, how do you deal with this? I don't know, right? I couldn't do it myself. So those are the kinds of things that they're looking at when they're looking at the family in the first place. All of that baggage is coming through the door with them. In my former life as a financial planner, we would work very, very hard to make sure that people tried to answer those questions before they got to this stage, which was nice. We thought we were being helpful, but you can't push people to do what they don't want to do. My dad will be 94 on Saturday. He's coming to the Cape to celebrate. He likes lobster pie. So thank you, Plank's Tavern. And we started this conversation with him in 2015 when I came to the first summit, right? He didn't want to have anything to do with it. Not at all. But now, he's healthy. He doesn't even take aspirin, but he's slowing down. It takes him longer to get out of a chair. And now he's going, you know that thing you were talking to me about? Could we talk about that some? Thank God. So we don't get here, right? But same scenario, I'm on the Cape. He's in Holyoke, which is 3 hours west of here. My sister is the primary caregiver, and my brother's in Chicago with his husband. So we're guys, you run into that thing again. So that was the kind of stuff that was running through my head as I saw all of this. And it's a real call to action on our part, regardless of what we do. Today, as CFO for the AIDS Support Group, one of the things that I talk with staff about, we have a large medical case management staff, and one of the things that we talk about is that emergency call list is not enough. What else do we do? How do we get in front of this so we don't end up with our guys in that scenario? As you were pointing out earlier, the response to the HIV crisis has been amazing. And now it's a chronic disease. Well, that doesn't mean we have to walk away and let go. We still have diagnoses coming through the door every day, primarily because of drug abuse, not because of sexual activity, but it's still there. We still need to be attentive. And so these are the kinds of conversations that we're having in that regard. So I don't know if that's answering your question at all, but that's where I'm at. Go for it.
Hi. I came to Cape Cod Hospital in 2017 through the Council of Churches. I'm an ordained Lutheran pastor, and I am privileged to be the Protestant/interfaith chaplain at the hospital. And I got involved with quality of life right away because I have other family stories, as we all do, that helped me know what I knew then. And now I know better how I could have done even more 20 years ago when most of those stories happened. But as chaplain, I'm privileged to have good talk with people. That's what I do. And I try to have good talk about many different things. And it doesn't have to be religious because I believe we are all spiritual. And some of us happen to be religious about it. But it's the spirituality that counts. It's the spiritual care that counts. And that's what I bring to the table. In this scenario, I would say, I wish I had been called in earlier to meet this patient if they'd been hospitalized the first time, when we know they're fragile. And so that's part of how do we get better at that as a system, right? Understanding that chaplain doesn't have to be about religion. It's about relationship and good talk. And when I look at this, I say, what I try to talk about is mortality, not death. I try to talk about mortality as something we all face, whether we face it or not. We will all come to it. And how do we have that conversation? That may lead into the treatments that we're trying to decide between, do or not do, how many, how few, can be more about suffering, which would cause less or more suffering. And also, for me, it's not about pulling the plug, which is the underneath worry that everyone has. If I don't do the next thing, I will feel guilty or be accused of, or everyone expects me to not be pulling the plug. It's more about stopping the intervention that lets nature take its course, that we all come to a natural end, and we all want a natural end, do we not? So how do we, I almost use the word consume our healthcare. How do we make choices and have autonomy in the way that we use healthcare? And I can tell you that most patients I talk to, whether they're in for something very minor or something very serious, they all want a good talk with their docs. And that doesn't always happen. And I'm not here to blame. I'm just here to say that's the system that we're working with and we need to improve. And we're all on that same page, are we not? Can I get an amen?
Amen.
So for me as chaplain, I often get to spend way more time. And I'm going to give you an example that's recent. And this patient gave me permission. I'm not going to give you any details, but she gave me permission to use her as an example. So I got a call on Monday from the deacon of St. David's Church, Episcopal Church in Yarmouth. I'm on my way. I'm following the ambulance. We're going to the ER. Can you come down and see us? Yep. So I got down there, spent significant time with a woman who has been living independently, clearly some stage of dementia, clearly beloved by this church. She's mostly homebound, but they reach out and they make sure they go see her. So how do we do that as churches? And I work with that on a fringe. But I'm there, and I establish a bit of a relationship with this patient. She trusts me, which is good, and it probably because the deacon has called me and introduced me, so that helps, right? And I can spend time with her while the deacon might be making phone calls or something like that. I come back down and see her, and now they've decided they're going to admit her because it was clear to me after a 5-minute conversation, and I had a conversation with the deacon that, in my humble opinion, she was not safe to go home, but certainly she needed to be assessed for that medically here, at the hospital rather. Now the background to this is in 2018, I went to St. David's a couple of times, and I had brought the Quality of Life Initiative to them for after-church conversation. And I don't bring the slideshow. I just bring me, and I start to tell stories, and I ask people to tell their stories, and then we talk about what might we do differently. What did you learn? What's your heartbreak? What's your wish? Those kinds of things. And then we talk about the forms, because they do need to know about the forms. People don't know. Oh, I need an MOLST? What is that? Oh, I need to know who my agent is in a crisis situation, not just who they are in the relationship to me. So I guess what I'm saying is I had established that in 2018 with the deacon, and she and I had a good relationship based on that, and she knew how to talk with the family about the healthcare proxy. And she knew enough to call me to say, can you meet me here? And she knew I would be there for them to assist her in the relationship, because it was a mess kind of thing. Even though this patient could still speak, it was clear she was at the edge of, does she have capacity, right? And the challenge of that. And then who is the healthcare agent? And is the doctor going to invoke it? And then what happens? So it so happens that the healthcare agent used to be a member of her congregation, but he's a very trusted friend, and he's a member of another church now. And someone I knew, but I didn't know that I knew her at the time. And so between me and the deacon and the patient, we figured out, how she's feeling, and she felt heard enough that her anxiety was coming down. And then the healthcare agent got involved and could talk to the docs. And so they're all having a really good conversation, even though the healthcare agent's out camping somewhere off Cape. So the system is working and is getting better by virtue of this Quality of Life Initiative that originally started as a, what's the word I want? Task force, thank you. So I am privileged to be able to have the good talk whenever I can, and I have learned so much here today. I'm going to have better conversations after this. Thank you.
Thank you.